Have you noticed that we are living in a time when there is a silent exodus from cities to the countryside? You may not have noticed it yet because this movement is not widely reported. It does not draw the attention of traditional media. It does not generate dramatic headlines. It is a subtle phenomenon, almost invisible, but it represents one of the deepest social transformations of our time. The most conscious people, those who have developed a sharper perception of the direction our civilization is taking, are silently moving away from large urban centers. And this is happening right under our noses, without fanfare, without manifestos, without most people realizing the profound change it represents for the future of our species. Why are these people making this choice? What do they see that the rest of society seems unable to notice? And what can we learn from this movement that may help us better understand the critical moment we are going through as a civilization? For most of human history, we lived in small communities, in direct contact with nature and with rhythms of life determined by natural cycles. The sun rose, we worked. The sun set, we rested. The seasons dictated what we planted, what we harvested, how we dressed, what foods we consumed. Our survival depended directly on our ability to observe and respect natural patterns. And more importantly, we lived in communities where everyone knew each other by name, where human relationships were direct, not mediated by screens or algorithms. When we needed help, we looked into our neighbor's eyes and extended a hand. When we celebrated, we did it together, in physical presence, sharing food, music, stories. This was human reality for tens of thousands of years. Then, in the blink of an eye, in evolutionary terms, everything changed. The Industrial Revolution began a process of mass urbanization that accelerated exponentially over the last 2 centuries. Cities grew, swallowing fields and forests. Machines began to dictate our work rhythms, replacing natural cycles. Traditional communities fragmented as people migrated to urban centers in search of factory jobs. And this process was considered progress, development, evolution. After all, cities brought conveniences that rural areas did not offer: running water, electricity, modern hospitals, abundant entertainment. The rural exodus was celebrated as a triumphant march toward a better future. And indeed, in many measurable ways, life improved for billions of people. Life expectancy dramatically increased. Infant mortality plummeted. Chronic hunger, which haunted humanity for millennia, was significantly reduced in many parts of the world. Diseases that wiped out entire populations were controlled or eradicated. In material terms and physical health, the 20th century represented an unprecedented leap forward for our species, and cities were the main stage of this transformation. But something unexpected began to happen in recent decades. Amid material abundance, unprecedented digital connectivity, and almost infinite access to information, a new kind of poverty emerged, a scarcity of a different kind. We started to realize that we were losing something essential, something that cannot be measured in GDP statistics or human development reports. Rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide skyrocketed. In the richest and most technologically advanced societies, the feeling of loneliness became epidemic, even in densely populated cities where people literally live on top of each other in apartment buildings. The sense of existential emptiness, of lack of purpose and meaning, became a common complaint among people who have all their material needs met. What are we losing? What is missing in our hyper-connected urban lives that leaves us with the feeling that despite everything we achieved, something fundamental was left behind? Perhaps we are experiencing a form of spiritual and emotional malnutrition. Just as our bodies need certain nutrients to function properly, our psyche also has fundamental requirements for well-being. And our modern cities, with their frantic pace, superficial relationships, disconnection from nature, and increasingly artificial spaces, may not be providing the essential psychological nutrients that we need to thrive as whole human beings. This deficit manifests itself in various ways. We see it in the growing search for mindfulness practices. Yoga and meditation attempts to regain a sense of presence that modern life constantly sabotages with its many distractions and demands for multitasking. We see it in the growing popularity of spiritual retreats, often in natural settings, where people pay to temporarily escape constant connectivity and regain a sense of inner quiet. We see it in the increase of psychedelic use and other substances that promise transcendent experiences in a world that has become excessively materialistic and prosaic. All of these are attempts to recover something we feel we lost, even if we cannot always name exactly what it is. And it is in this context that the phenomenon of the awakened, quietly leaving the cities and seeking a simpler, more connected, more meaningful life in the countryside, emerges. We are not talking here necessarily about a religious movement or a specific sect. We are talking about people who, through different paths, came to the conclusion that the predominant lifestyle model in modern metropolitan areas is fundamentally unsustainable, not only ecologically, but also psychologically and spiritually. These are people who have felt on their own skin the hidden cost of living in environments that, despite all their material conveniences, seem deliberately designed to keep us disconnected from our natural rhythms, authentic human relationships, and a deeper sense of belonging and purpose. I want to pause for a moment to ask, do you also feel this deep disconnection in your daily life? This sense that although we are more connected than ever through technology, something essential has been lost along the way? I know it can be hard to put into words. Many of us carry this weight in silence, believing we are the only ones feeling this particular emptiness. But you're not alone in this. If this feeling resonates with you, share your experience in the comments. It can be as simple as writing, I feel this disconnection when, filling in your personal experience. Your comment might be exactly what someone else needs to read today to feel that they are not alone in their struggle. Sometimes, naming what we feel is the first step toward transforming it. The silent exodus to the countryside we are observing today is different from the counterculture movements of the past. It is not like the hippies of the 1960 seconds who openly rejected mainstream values and created visible, often intentionally provocative alternative communities. The current movement is more subtle, more diverse, and in many ways more pragmatic. It is not necessarily a complete rejection of modernity or technology, but an attempt to create a more balanced and conscious relationship with them. The people involved in this exodus are not simply running away from civilization, they are trying to reimagine it in a way that is more aligned with our true needs as human beings. And it is important to notice that this movement is being enabled by the very technologies that turned our cities into environments so challenging for human well-being. High-speed internet allows many people to work remotely, freeing them from the need to live near urban employment centers. Renewable energy technologies such as solar panels and small wind turbines make it possible to live comfortably even in remote areas without relying on centralized energy infrastructures. E-commerce platforms allow access to products and services that were once available only in cities. And social networks allow people with similar interests to find each other and form communities, even when geographically dispersed. Thus, paradoxically, the same technologies that disconnected us from essential aspects of human experience are now being used to reconnect us, even if in new and unpredictable ways. It is as if we are using the tools of modernity to heal the wounds that modernity itself inflicted on our collective psyche. And this is fascinating because it suggests that we do not necessarily need to choose between completely rejecting modern technology or fully surrendering to its most dehumanizing aspects. Perhaps there is a middle path, a way to integrate the best of both worlds. But what exactly are people seeking when they leave cities behind? What do they hope to find in the countryside that they cannot access in urban environments? Certainly, it is not just about cleaner air or cheaper rent, although these factors may play a role. What is at stake here is something deeper, more fundamental to the human condition. First, there is a search for reconnection with the Earth's natural rhythms. Living in cities, especially modern metropolises that never sleep, we almost completely lose sensitivity to nature's cycles. We rarely notice the phases of the moon, the subtle seasonal changes, the migratory patterns of birds. Our bodies are subjected to artificial light that confuses our circadian rhythms, artificial climate control that isolates us from temperature variations, industrialized food that disconnects us from plant growth cycles. This disconnection from natural rhythms has profound consequences for our physical and mental health. Even if we do not always consciously perceive it, people who move to the countryside often report an almost immediate sense of relief when they re-establish contact with natural cycles. Waking up with the sunrise instead of a blaring alarm clock, directly feeling seasonal changes instead of merely adjusting the thermostat, growing at least part of their own food, actively participating in the miracle of growth instead of simply buying anonymous plastic-wrapped groceries at the supermarket. These reconnections with Earth's rhythms are not luxuries or romantic ideals. They are fundamental recalibrations of our relationship with the natural world from which we evolved and to which our bodies and minds still respond deeply, even if our techno-industrial culture tries to convince us otherwise. Second, there is a pursuit of more authentic and meaningful human relationships. In large cities, it is common to know hundreds or even thousands of people on a superficial level, yet have truly deep relationships with almost no one. We constantly meet people, but these encounters are often brief, transactional, mediated by specific social or professional roles. Urban anonymity, which on one hand offers a form of freedom, on the other hand can create a type of existential isolation where we are perpetually surrounded by strangers, even when physically close to them. Digital communication technologies exacerbate this tendency, creating the illusion of connection while often only amplifying loneliness in smaller rural communities. It is harder to maintain this kind of anonymity. People know each other not only in a specific context, but in multiple dimensions of their lives. The baker is not just a baker, he is also the father of a child at the local school, the neighbor who helps repair the fence, the amateur musician who plays at the community festival. This multidimensionality of relationships creates a denser and more resilient social fabric, where people are seen and acknowledged as whole human beings, not just as functions or specific roles. And this visibility, this mutual recognition, satisfies a fundamental human need to be truly seen and known by others. Third, there is a search for a more direct and meaningful relationship with the basic necessities of life. In modern cities, we rarely think about where our water, food, and energy come from. These fundamental elements of our survival reach us through systems so complex and opaque that they become almost magical in their invisibility. We turn on the faucet and water flows, flip a switch and the light turns on, go to the supermarket and shelves are full. We do not need to think about watersheds, soil, nutrient cycles, or global supply chains. And this convenience carries a hidden price. We lose the sense of direct connection with the natural systems on which our life depends. Many of the people who are choosing life in the countryside seek to re-establish this direct connection. Not necessarily trying to become completely self-sufficient, which would be an unrealistic goal for most, but seeking a clearer understanding and a more active participation in the processes that sustain their lives. Growing a garden, collecting rainwater, generating part of their own energy with solar panels, building with local materials, participating in community composting systems. These practices are not just hobbies or curiosities. They are ways of reconnecting with the material reality of life on Earth, a reality from which we have dangerously distanced ourselves in our hyper-mediated urban environments. And it is important to understand that this search is not motivated only by naive romanticism or nostalgia for an idealized past. Many of the people who are making this transition are highly educated, technically sophisticated, and deeply aware of the global challenges we face as a species. They are not simply running away from the problems of the modern world. They are actively seeking and experimenting with alternative solutions. They are building living micro-laboratories of different possibilities for the human future at a time when our dominant civilizational model shows increasingly clear signs of unsustainability, because the truth is that our megacities, with their dependence on fossil fuels, their extensive globalized supply chains, their centralized water and energy systems, their disconnection from natural cycles are extremely vulnerable to disruptions. Just look at how extreme weather events, which are becoming increasingly frequent with the advancement of climate change, can quickly paralyze entire metropolises, or how a pandemic can reveal the fragility of our seemingly robust supply chains, or how geopolitical conflicts can threaten the supply of essential resources for the functioning of cities. In contrast, smaller, more localized communities with some degree of self-sufficiency in basic needs, such as food, water, and energy, with strong and diversified social networks, and with a more direct connection to local natural resources, have the potential to be much more resilient in the face of the disruptions that will inevitably come in the next decades. I am not suggesting here an apocalyptic vision of the future, but realistically acknowledging that we are entering a period of instability and accelerated change in multiple dimensions, from climate to socio-political, from technological to economic. And in this kind of environment, resilience, the ability to adapt and thrive even in conditions of disturbance and change, becomes a fundamental virtue. So when we observe this silent exodus of the awakened to the countryside, what we are seeing is not necessarily a romantic escape from reality or an irrational rejection of modernity. It may be something much more significant. The first signs of an evolutionary adaptation of our species to the emerging conditions of the 21st century, it may be the beginning of a new synthesis between the technological knowledge accumulated by industrial civilization and the wisdom embedded in more traditional ways of living in direct relationship with the earth and in human communities of manageable scale. And if that is the case, these people who now seem eccentric or marginal, rejecting what most consider a normal and successful life in the cities, may in fact be the pioneers of new patterns of human life, more adapted to the realities of the approaching future. It would not be the first time in history that crucial social innovations first appear on the margins of society before becoming mainstream. In fact, almost all major social transformations begin this way. Small experiments on the edges, which eventually provoke changes at the center when conditions mature. But there is an interesting paradox in this movement that is worth exploring. On one hand, people who are leaving the cities in search of a more connected life in the countryside often express a deep critique of modern technological society and its impacts on human experience. On the other hand, many of these same people make intensive use of advanced technologies to make their new lifestyle viable and sustainable. They work remotely using high-speed internet, stay connected with interest-based communities through social networks, use apps to map local resources or coordinate community initiatives, and adopt technological innovations in areas such as renewable energy, permaculture, bioconstruction, and water purification. This apparent paradox reveals something important about the nature of the human relationship with technology. The problem may not be technology itself, but the values and purposes that guide its development and use. The same internet that can alienate us through addictive algorithms designed to maximize screen time and data collection can also connect us in meaningful ways with people who share our passions and values. The same smartphones that can keep us in a perpetual state of superficial distraction can also serve as powerful tools for learning, community coordination, and knowledge exchange. The same social networks that can promote envious comparison and toxic polarization can also facilitate the formation of communities of practice around more sustainable and meaningful lifestyles. What seems to be emerging is not a technophobic rejection of modernity, but a more conscious and intentional renegotiation of our relationship with it. An attempt to recover human agency in relation to technology, using it as a tool for consciously chosen purposes, instead of allowing it to use us as means for its own ends or for the ends of those who control it. A search for ways to integrate the best of modern innovations with the best of traditional wisdom, creating new and potentially transformative syntheses. And this brings us to a crucial question. Why does this significant movement remain relatively invisible to mainstream society? Why, despite involving a growing number of people and potentially pointing to important paths for our collective future, does it receive no significant attention from the media, academia, or the institutions that shape public discourse? Part of the answer is undoubtedly in the dispersed and decentralized nature of the movement. There is no central organization, a single manifesto, a charismatic leader, or a clearly defined collective identity that the media can easily identify and label. It is countless individuals and small groups making similar choices for diverse reasons, connected more by affinities of values and practices than by formal structures. Another part of the answer lies in the dominant economic and political interests, which have little incentive to draw attention to viable alternatives to the hyper-connected and hyper-consumerist urban lifestyle model. Our economies are deeply dependent on specific patterns of consumption, work, and social organization that would be potentially threatened if a significant number of people began seriously questioning these structures and experimenting with alternatives. But perhaps the deeper reason for the relative invisibility of this movement is that it challenges some of the most fundamental and rarely questioned cultural assumptions of our civilization. The idea that progress is linear and inevitably leads us from rural to urban, from traditional to modern, from local to global. The belief that human happiness is directly correlated with material wealth and access to technological conveniences. The assumption that the constant rise of technological complexity and organizational scale is both inevitable and desirable. These narratives are so deeply embedded in our culture that alternatives tend to be classified as reactionary, regressive, or simply unrealistic. And yet, if we look more closely at the available evidence on human well-being, life satisfaction, mental health, and social connection, we find little support for these assumptions. The richest people are not always happier. The most technologically advanced societies do not always have the highest levels of psychological well-being and may even show higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Megacities do not always provide richer or more meaningful social connection than smaller communities. And the constant acceleration of life, facilitated by digital technology, does not always result in a deeper sense of accomplishment or purpose, and may even produce the opposite, a growing sense of emptiness and exhaustion. Perhaps what we are witnessing with this silent exodus to the countryside is actually the beginning of a more fundamental questioning of these dominant cultural narratives. Not a romantic rejection of modernity in favor of an idealized past, but a pragmatic attempt to create new balances, new syntheses that can truly meet our integral human needs, not just our material conveniences or the demands of an economic system that often seems to have decoupled itself from real human well-being. And this brings us back to the central question: what can we learn from this movement? What insights does it offer that may be relevant not only for those who are choosing to leave the cities, but for all of us who are navigating the complexities and contradictions of contemporary life? Perhaps the most important lesson is the need for a more conscious and intentional posture regarding how we live. Instead of simply following culturally prescribed paths, the default patterns of life that our society offers us, we can ask deeper questions about what truly nourishes us as human beings, what truly brings us lasting satisfaction and authentic meaning, and we can then make more deliberate choices about where and how we live, how we organize our time and attention, who we connect with, and how we relate to the broader technological, economic, and social systems. This more conscious posture does not necessarily require a radical change in lifestyle or location. It is possible to bring elements of this reconnection to urban life as well. One can grow plants on balconies or in community gardens, strengthen relationships with neighbors, and build local mutual support networks, create daily and weekly rhythms that honor the body's and mind's need for rest and regeneration, participate in initiatives that reconnect people to food through urban agriculture or local farmers' markets. The fundamental question is not necessarily where we live, but how we live, with what degree of awareness and intentionality. And perhaps that is the true essence of what it means to be awake in the current context. It is not about a particular spiritual revelation or a specific ideological affiliation or a defined set of practices. It is about awakening from automatic unconsciousness, from cultural autopilot, to a more conscious and chosen way of being in the world. It is about reclaiming our agency as human beings, our ability to question assumptions, reimagine possibilities, and create new forms of life that truly honor who we are and what we need, both individually and collectively. And this awakening is deeply political in the broadest sense of the term, even when it does not express itself through conventional activism or partisan engagement, because it questions the structures of power that benefit from our disconnection, our distractibility, our compensatory consumerism, our isolation from one another. It questions the logic of a system that consistently prioritizes abstract economic growth over concrete human well-being, technical efficiency over lived experience, global scale over local resilience. The silent exodus to the countryside can thus be seen not only as a movement of people seeking a better quality of life for themselves, but as a form of silent resistance, a vote of no confidence in the status quo, an embodied statement that other ways of living are possible and desirable. And in this sense, even those who will never leave the cities can find inspiration and solidarity in these pioneers who are actively experimenting with alternatives, testing possibilities, and potentially paving paths that others may follow in the future. I need to ask, as we explore these ideas together, at what moments in your life do you feel this search for meaning most intensely? The one we're discussing here, those moments when the distractions fall away and you wonder if you are living according to what truly matters. I know that many of us keep these questions to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of seeming too intense, too philosophical, in a world that values the superficial and the immediate. But here, in this space, your deep reflection is welcome. Share in the comments. I question the meaning of my life when your honesty may illuminate the path of someone who is going through the same existential crossroads, showing that we are not as alone as we think in our deepest questions. It is fascinating to observe how major transitions in human history are rarely perceived in real time by most of the people who lived through them. Peasants who witnessed the beginning of the Industrial Revolution likely did not understand they were witnessing a fundamental transformation in human organization that would eventually change every aspect of life. The first people to use the internet in the 1980 seconds and 1990 seconds could hardly imagine how this technology would radically reconfigure society in just a few decades. Likewise, it is possible that we are now in the early stages of an equally profound transformation, whose full meaning will only become apparent to future historians looking back. Perhaps what we are witnessing is not merely a marginal adjustment in human settlement patterns, but the beginning of a more fundamental reorientation of our relationship with technology, with nature, with work, with time, and with each other. A reorientation that may eventually affect even those who would never consider leaving the cities, as new values, practices, and possibilities gradually spread from the periphery to the center of culture. And perhaps the most significant aspect of this movement is not the fact that people are moving geographically, but what this shift represents in terms of a search for more integrated and harmonious forms of human existence. The desire to live not only as consumers or producers in an abstract global economy, but as whole human beings embedded in specific places, in direct relationship with the natural cycles and local communities that sustain our lives. The yearning to recover dimensions of human experience that were marginalized or suppressed by industrial modernity, not out of romantic nostalgia, but out of a pragmatic recognition that these dimensions are essential for our flourishing as a species. Ultimately, the movement of the awakened toward the countryside can be understood as part of a broader search for ways of living that are simultaneously ecologically viable, psychologically fulfilling, and spiritually meaningful. A search that becomes increasingly urgent as the limits and contradictions of our current civilizational model become more evident, not only intellectually, but as a lived experience for a growing number of people. And in this sense, even if you never consider moving to the countryside, even if your life remains firmly rooted in the urban context, there are valuable lessons to be learned from those who are exploring alternative paths. Because the fundamental questions they are addressing through their geographic shift are questions that all of us face, regardless of where we live. How can we live in ways that honor our nature as evolved biological beings on a living planet? How can we create meaningful and sustaining relationships in a world that constantly pushes us towards superficiality and distraction? How can we recover a sense of agency and purpose within systems that often make us feel like cogs in an impersonal machine? The answer to these questions does not lie in a universal solution or a single model of a good life, but in a continuous process of experimentation, learning, and adaptation, both individually and collectively. The challenge is not to find a definitive answer, but to be willing to ask the questions, to question what is taken for granted, and to imagine possibilities beyond the confines of conventional thinking. And perhaps this is the true meaning of the awakening at the root of this movement. Not an arrival at a final state of elevated consciousness, but a commitment to an ongoing process of questioning, discovery, and growth. A commitment that can be lived in countless different ways, adapted to the unique circumstances, needs, and possibilities of each person and community. A commitment that at its core is about reclaiming our full humanity in a world that so often seems designed to reduce us to much narrower dimensions of existence. If you recognized yourself in the questions we explore today and feel that you need more clarity to navigate this increasingly complex and bewildering world, consider joining us. By subscribing to the channel, you will have weekly access to reflections that go beyond superficial narratives and touch the roots of our contemporary anxieties. I do not offer simple answers or magical formulas, but an honest space of contemplation about the real challenges we face as individuals in search of meaning. This is an ongoing journey of discovery, and each video is a step toward a deeper understanding of yourself and the world we are creating together. Subscribe so we can have this essential conversation every week, and so we can build together a wisdom more suitable for the extraordinary times in which we live. Ultimately, the movement of the awakened toward the countryside is not just about changing location, but about changing perspective. It is about recognizing that what is often presented as inevitable progress may in fact be only one among many possible paths for human development. It is about reclaiming the ability to imagine and create viable alternatives to the dominant models of life, work, community, and relationship with the earth. And in this sense, regardless of where we choose to live physically, we can all participate in this awakening to richer possibilities of human existence. The real question is not countryside or city, but how can we live in ways that genuinely honor who we are and what we need as complete human beings wherever we are? AI should never pretend to be a human being. All this talk about freedom of speech is in many ways misleading because only humans have freedom of speech. But on platforms like X, like TikTok, like many others, the ones who actually control the platforms are AIs. I don't think that companies should censor what humans say on social media. Should be very careful about that. But so many people are saying so many things, and the ones who choose which posts to promote, who magnify the message, they are algorithms, not human beings. There should not be any protection of freedom of speech for the algorithms, because the algorithms don't have freedom of speech.
So you're all for banning algorithms and bots?
No, not for banning them, but for regulating them. One key regulation is that an AI should never pretend to be a human being. If you are interacting with somebody online, you should be able to know if it's an AI or not. It's okay to interact with AIs, but on condition that it reveals it is an AI. When comparing AI, say, to the threat of nuclear war has no upside. It has no supporters. It's a huge, huge threat, especially in today's world, when we see that countries like Russia are just completely disregarding the biggest taboos of the international system. Since 1945, the biggest taboo of the international system was that a strong country cannot just invade and try to conquer and destroy a weaker country. And now this is broken. So the danger is huge, but at least everybody understands the danger. There are no winners in a nuclear war. With AI, it's a much more complicated challenge. There is a huge positive potential, and people find it very difficult to understand what the threats are. Ever since the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was at least clear to humans what is the danger of nuclear technology. You don't need long explanations. With AI, it's difficult to grasp the danger because it's really an alien threat. The key problem about the world is not evil, it's ignorance, it's delusion.
When you read Nexus, you say humans are smart but also stupid and self-destructive. So it almost like puts you down a bit.
Humans think that with all our technological development, especially in the field of information technology, we will be freed, liberated from ignorance and delusion. And it's not happening. In the monotheistic religions like Christianity and Islam, there is a belief in evil. But in Hinduism and Buddhism, the main idea is that the problem is usually ignorance and delusion. People sometimes think that AI maybe will tell us the truth about the world. Again, it's unlikely to happen. The danger is that AI will entrap us, imprison us within a web of delusions even worse than anything we have seen before in history.